We had coal operators coming to me saying, I'm losing access to capital. We can't finance our stuff. No, bank with us. We're getting debanked all over the place. And so we pushed back against it and got other states, great state treasurers, patriotic people that helped stand up against this ESG movement that was destroying West Virginia. But yeah, the working class of West Virginia was like, yes, thank you for doing this, fighting for our jobs, fighting for our economy, fighting for our way of life. And so that really, I think, helped solidify support in that regard. And, in terms of libertarian mindset, it'd be, no, don't exercise authority and power through your elected office. That's literally, though, why people elected me. They did not elect me to get on television and tell them that they're getting screwed. They already know that. They know that. They elected me to do something about it. And that's what I did.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sitdown, but before we get to the interview, we'd love it if you'd hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may be joining us. And please remember to give us a 5-star review because we love your feedback. Remember, it's your government, and together we'll expose how it really works and how to affect real change. Without further ado, here's the interview. Representative-elect Riley Moore, welcome to the Signal Sitdown. Welcome to Washington, D.C.
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
It's not very far from where you live in West Virginia, where you're representing next Congress, the 2nd District. First impressions of this town. I know you have some familiarity with it already, but you're coming in with a whole new role.
Well, yeah, I worked here before. I worked on the Hill quite a while ago, though. But it's interesting being down here since it's generally the source of so many of our problems in West Virginia. So that's what I'm here to do, is try to change that and, put our people in a better position, since a lot of our problems literally emanate from this interesting city.
And I don't think it's any mistake that West Virginia has been such a focal point in the 2024 election cycle. With your election, generated a lot of enthusiasm amongst people in this town in particular. I have friends over at American Moment, et cetera, who are very enthusiastic about you becoming treasurer of the state of West Virginia. And then when you decided to make a run for Congress, there were a lot of friends in this town that were excited. But also, Jim Justice being that 50th Republican senator, and then whatever wins we could stack on top of that, that was going to be the size of the majority. And West Virginia was once a blue state during the Clinton era, then NAFTA. And now you're looking less than 30 years down the road. West Virginia is a 69% Trump state. Yeah. For me, someone who loves the Appalachian region, West Virginia, every county is considered Appalachian in the state. It's the Trump movement is much more encapsulated by a state like West Virginia than it is by a state like Texas, for example. Why do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. And it's, first of all, let me note, thank you for saying Appalachia and saying that correctly. Two, yeah, we have been chipping away on it for a while, but it really all turned in 2014. So that was midterms with Obama. That's where we took the House and the Senate, the state legislature, and then followed on that 16 wave where we took almost all the Board of Public Works seats except for state treasurer, obviously. But we did have an elected Democrat governor who is now a Republican. So that's when Jim Justice originally ran, and then obviously had a clarifying moment and said, what am I doing as a Democrat? And became a Republican, and now our incoming senator. But way back before any of that, so Al Gore was fairly confident that he could win West Virginia, as the Clinton machine had won West Virginia twice. And so Bush was really the first one in a long time, I think going back to, Reagan won it, but not twice. So he was really the first one to be able to turn that. So in that 2000 election cycle, and then obviously we got Shelley Moore Capito came into Congress, who was the only Republican in our congressional delegation. But Bush won West Virginia, and that really started us on this path. But it did. It dates back to NAFTA, particularly in my district, Northern Panhandle specifically would be a great example where we do a lot of steel manufacturing. Where it's a big steel site. Actually used to be the Weirton Steel was the largest steel manufacturer in the world at one point. We had tens of thousands of people working in that industry. Obviously, that's not the case now due to globalization and offshoring and dumping of cheap steel, which for some reason people of this town have allowed to happen for successive decades, and letting China into the World Trade Organization, most favored nation status, and all these other things piled on top of it that has really crushed a state like West Virginia. And it was that, and then if you flash forward to the Democrats really starting to move into this environmental extremism as it relates to the coal industry, that as well started to push people into the Republican column. That really, I mean, you got to think that clean power plant rule, we lost 30,000 coal mining jobs in just a few years due to the Obama administration. And then the social issues, obviously, we are a socially conservative state, very much so. We, after Roe v. Wade was overturned, just here recently passed a law in our state legislature when I was down there as state treasurer, which I supported. We have 0 weeks in West Virginia. We have an abortion ban. It is 0 weeks, and which we didn't get much fanfare for that, but that wasn't even a question for us. We've banned transgender surgeries on minors in West Virginia. We got open carry, we got constitutional carry, campus carry, and one of my bills, which was the parking lot bill, so individuals could keep firearms in their vehicles at their place of work. And we're one of the safest states as it relates to crime. So there's a lot. It has always been a socially conservative state, even when you still had Democrats in charge. It's a state that is very religious, very community-oriented, but also we have a lot of corporate skepticism in the state of West Virginia, particularly as it relates to the pharmaceutical industry and some of these other folks that have been taking advantage of us over the years. And we're tired of being lied to, and we're tired of being taken advantage of. And all the hard work that we've done in a state like West Virginia, would look over the decades, that helped build this great country. I mean, we mined the coal that forged the steel, that built the buildings, that built the airplanes and the warships and the rails and everything else that built the United States. And what do we get? In thanks for that is an opioid crisis destroying our coal industry. And really, from a town like this, Washington, D.C., total disregard for the feelings of the people of West Virginia, and I'd say Appalachia writ large.
Yeah. And it's such an interesting test case for me in particular, West Virginia, where if you go and talk to anybody from West Virginia, I mean, they'll give you the shirt off of their back. No matter where you came from, no matter what you do, West Virginia people are just always super duper nice to me. And despite the economic destruction, I feel like West Virginia is a test case to prove the liberal thesis incorrect, which is it's just the material conditions. If you fix all of the material conditions, then all of the problems will go away. Now, West Virginia has had some issues because of the material conditions devolving, because of poor trade policy, right? Because of poor healthcare policy, etc. And yet, this is a state where social institutions and the social fabric seems to have stayed relatively strong despite some of the hollowing out that you've seen not only in West Virginia, but across the country, right? I think Senator-elect J.D. Vance, when he talks about his upbringing in Ohio and his family's life in Kentucky, the material conditions had a larger effect on the community's health because the social fabric wasn't as strong in those communities as it was in the communities that I've visited in West Virginia. I mean, what is the secret sauce there is that keeps the West Virginia social fabric so strong?
I mean, in a word, God. I mean, that's it. These are obviously everything you listed, these temporal concerns, right? And then there are the ones that are closer to the spirit, that is really what has kept us close through all of these hardships where, unfortunately, some of our communities over the decades have been conditioned to living poor. But I'd say that we're very rich in spirit and very rich in our faith and our communities. Now, the opioid crisis has certainly pulled at those fabrics and has frayed some of those things. Unfortunately, we do have a lot of issues as it relates to that have strained families and communities. But, a lot of life is still centered around church and faith and things of that and community and things of those nature. I think that's really what's helped us hang on through these difficulties. But, the state, I will say, has been on a really rapid rise in terms of economic growth here as of late, particularly in the manufacturing sector. We have been doing quite well, despite their efforts to destroy it, in the coal industry, natural gas. We also do oil. We do all three. We're the fifth largest energy producer in the United States, little old West Virginia. But that's because of Republican control coming back, right? And I think a cautionary tale for a lot of states that are turning red or are red currently. Virginia is a great example, which Virginia's a great state. But, they were so specifically focused on just the economic growth that was going to fix everything in the state of Virginia, which for a time it did. But they lost sight of all the socially conservative things that needed to happen. And they didn't press on those. And so then you had a massive influx of individuals. You basically created a kind of economic free state, so to speak, kind of libertarian playground that made it a lot more attractive where, yes, there's a lot of economic prosperity here, but it's devoid of any grounding in any type of social conservative values that really need to rest upon these economic things that you do. So I think we're doing it correctly. And what I mean by that is, look, I mentioned some of these things that we passed in West Virginia. I don't think we're going to have a bunch of liberals want to move to West Virginia, right? I mean, they look at these things. What's their stance on life, guns, trans issues, this, that, the other? We are about as based as you can get in the country as it relates to those issues. So we're able to maintain our culture and our values and our morality in the state of West Virginia while doing economic growth at the same time. Virginia, and nothing against Virginia, I like Virginia, the mothership, we used to be part of it, but they traded one for the other, is what it feels like sometimes. Now, look, they've gone too far. That's why you had Governor Glenn Youngkin come in here and win, which is great. We like that. We want conservatives running West Virginia, running Virginia. It's better for us. We got to transit through there all the time. But that's where I think, you see a difference there and the way that we've done it, I think, differently than other states.
Yeah, and I think that recognition, I mean, it just seems like that is the political ethos generally of conservatives coming out of West Virginia. Line going up doesn't necessarily mean that the health of your community is going up. And it produces interesting politicians, yourself among them. You are not somebody who comes from an aristocratic background. Your family was a union household. You yourself went to trade school. And tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up getting into politics.
Well, that's probably a longer story than this podcast is. But yeah, I went to trade school first during high school and then finished after high school. And my mother's family they were all welders. That's what they had done, all union members. And my mother's family actually helped start Local 250 out in California when they got over from Ireland. and helped set up that local steam fitters, pipe fitters. And so I didn't really have any interest in college directly after high school and when I was getting close to the end, and decided to go into the business that my mother's family had done. And so became certified welder. I did a lot of different types of work. I worked actually in a mining operation at first. So I was maintaining mining equipment on the night shift. We're doing, 10, 12-hour shifts. And it was really good work, and ended up doing some steel structural as well, worked in a machine shop. So I done, very well-rounded welder. So not just kind of your stick welding, arc welding, but I could do MIG, TIG, stick, all kinds of stuff. And it was a great career. And so, but I ended up going to college, but then I was welding while I was still in college. That's where I was working in a machine shop for a while I was in college. And I was in college during 9/11, and that kind of, before that I was looking at like computer programming, which everybody was kind of doing at the time. We're all going to be computer programmers. And because I had a skill and I wanted another skill. And
you were going to learn to code.
Yeah, I was going to learn to code. And it was a lot simpler back then, I think. But anyway, 9/11 happens while I'm there, and then I didn't understand. Obviously, I knew what happened, but like, how did this happen? Where did this come from? And really got involved and started thinking about politics, in particular, international politics, international affairs. And I moved on to major in that, and just through several different kinds of jobs, eventually ended up on the Hill. And I was there for a while, and I worked on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and ended up getting a master's degree, National Defense University, houses Army War College and all that, and stayed on the Hill and on the committee then I got off, and I moved back West Virginia. I was living in West Virginia right near my parents. Actually live next door to them now. And I don't know, I got an itch to do public service again, and I ended up running for the House of Delegates. And this is kind of when the waves were kind of kicking off that I mentioned. I won by 100 votes.
It was close.
Oh, yeah. Won by 100 votes, House of Delegates, and,
treasurer, and
here I am now.
I loved the speech that you gave at the last National Conservative Conference, and I believe the title, if I remember it correctly, was how conservatives can capture labor's support, or something like that, along those lines. Yeah. And you talk about how while you were in your welding career, you saw your grandfather, I believe, retire with good benefits, and to live with dignity in that period of time. And he had worked hard with his hands his whole life. And when you entered into a career where you're working with a lot of different union folks, the material conditions had changed, where you weren't promised the same level of dignity as before. You were constantly under threat of displacement. A lot of the union bosses don't reflect your cultural values. You talked about two policies in particular when you were treasurer of West Virginia that said, we're going to make good on the vision and the promises that people in unions, working class folks, working class families want. And the first was your Jumpstart savings program. And the second was divesting West Virginia's dollars from BlackRock.
Yes.
Before we get into those two specific policies, because I think your tenure as treasurer of West Virginia speaks to the need to not only craft our rhetoric in a way that appeals to working class families, but actually deliver when you're in power, right? And the policies don't have to be reinventing the wheel. They can be as simple as divesting from BlackRock. So before we talk about that, I want to ask you, as you look at labor unions today, and as you look at this Republican realignment that's happening, on the national level, do enough Republicans mean what they say when it comes to the labor issue for us to make this a steady movement over time, or does this seem like a flash in the pan?
No, I think it is moving in the right direction. I met with Sean O'Brien just a couple weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago, as you know, as president of the Teamsters. And he was very vocally supportive when he met with us and other members of Congress about wanting Lori Chavez Dreamer. That's, there's no secret there. He really wanted Chavez Dreamer for the labor secretary. And the Trump administration, that's who they appointed. And so I think that says a lot about where this party's going. I think you need to look at the leader of the party, who is President Donald Trump. Obviously, his nomination for that labor secretary, I think it was last night, has come out opposed to the Nippon Steel acquisition of U.S. Steel. Mm-hmm. Now, for me, look, I'm endorsed by, I think it's 15 different labor unions. One of them is the United Steelworkers. The United Steelworkers do not want that acquisition to happen. So that's a big deal. And it's very important for a number of reasons. But, you look where the leader of the party is going, and I think things are moving in the right direction. And I will tell you, as somebody who has worked in a non-union shop, it is a lot harder than people understand, I think, sometimes. You don't get benefits. You're not getting health care. You're not getting retirement. You're working on hourly wages. You get a certain set of kind of vacation earned days that you're going to get. You don't have the ability to get any of that, and you are likely going to get hurt. That's going to happen, right? Over time, that is going to happen. And so that is something we need to think about as Republicans. How are we going, we keep talking about, we're party of the working class. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? And, we talk about, well, we want jobs. Yes, we do. We want good paying jobs. That's a difference, right? I mean, why do people join unions? Pay and benefits. Right?
Right.
These are the reasons that they join unions: pay and benefits. And that's, oversimplifying it a little bit, but those are really the most important aspects of that, is pay and benefits. Why was I looking to join the pipe fitters union? I can tell you from my own personal experience, pay and benefits. That's what it really came down to. Wanted health care, wanted retirement. I mean, think about this. Somebody who retires in a union, they got a pension and they get full health care benefits. Guess who's not using Medicare? Retired union workers. Mm-hmm. They're not. That's something nobody even talks about. The model has completely changed now, where, say, you're a president of a community bank and you retire. Well, you get a 401k and you got Medicare. That's it. And so it's like we're just adding more and more enrollees onto Medicare every year. There's not like some alternative to this right now, because the government has provided this. It's grown several times now as it relates to Medicare. Nothing against Medicare, but the government has created this incentive for the private sector, and they've answered in kind. So you're going to handle healthcare and retirement? Great. We don't need any defined benefit plan as it relates to retirement and healthcare.
Just as free trade creates offshoring, right?
Yeah.
It incentivizes the public sector to go elsewhere.
So that's something to think about, right? I do think, when we're sitting in there, to put a finer point and answer your question, and we're meeting with President Sean O'Brien and talking to other leaders in different labor unions, there was a big group there. Mm-hmm. And I think that, and to be clear, a lot of times previously you had Republicans who were supportive of labor unions, but were also very moderate on basically a whole array of issues. Well, that's not where I am, right? I am America first. And these unions are America first. Think about this. They don't hire illegal immigrants. They don't do that. Mm-hmm. That is outside of their parameters. They don't do that. They hire Americans. There's no foreign folks working in these unions that are not U.S. citizens. I mean, we should be like applauding that, right?
Right.
I mean, it sounds great to me. That kind of sounds like what we're trying to do here. And yeah, I mean, I think people are kind of starting to get it now, is that it's not just jobs, it's good paying jobs with benefits. And I think more people are talking and thinking about that. Last thing I'd mention on that, we keep talking about fixing Social Security, which is obviously important. But if you want more people working in labor, you can't push out the age of retirement. I mean, you're like at the outer limits of what people can do in labor right now in terms of the age of retirement.
Yeah. You can't be working a working class job that's heavy lifting 8 hours a day, age 72. And nor do I think the American people want that, right? Like
no.
This person has served their time. They deserve some dignity. They deserve time to spend with their grandkids.
They'll get hurt. They'll get killed.
Yeah.
I mean, people die on job sites, unfortunately. That happens. We got coal miners that have died in West Virginia, one just recently. These are dangerous jobs. They're important. This is why people unionize, because of the danger around it, pay benefits, and all those other important things. So we need to have respect for these types of jobs, which I think our party does. I do believe we're the party of the working class. We just need to continue to work on defining what that means for us as a party.
But for a long time, sadly, we weren't. And I guess my theory when I look at, let's say, the last 80 years of Republican politics history, right? For the last, before the Trump era, 40 years since the Reagan administration, 30 years since the Reagan administration, the right has been very antagonistic towards labor unions, whether they're public or private. And the reason for that early 2000s, 90s antagonism, some of it was deserved because a lot of these labor unions had been taken over by the left, and they were being used to cram the left's cultural agenda down the throats of the American people. They were being used to not actually look out for the interests of workers. They were being used to, fulfill the political needs of the Democratic Party. That I understand. But the reason that we ended up in that situation where the Democrats completely dominated labor unions was because Republicans, going off of libertarian economic ideologies in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, decided that they didn't want to play ball anymore, that they didn't want to do the basic work of politics. And so when Republicans decided to cede the ground, obviously that power vacuum and these massively powerful institutions with leagues of active political participants, right? If you're in a union, you are in politics. Now, we might say we don't want unions necessarily to be political entities. This is how economic policy works, right? There's always trade-offs. If you're involved in some sort of economic institution, group, collective, you're inherently a political actor. So we decided we didn't want to play anymore. Big power vacuum opens up, and the left fills it. That's my theory on how Republicans lost the unions in the first place. I don't think a lot of union workers over that period of time would say that's why Republicans lost the labor unions. So I guess my question for you is, when you talk to working class people who have recently come around to the Republican Party, what do they say? Why did Republicans lose support in the unions in the first place?
Well, yeah, I mean, you kind of touched on it. It was the antagonism towards unions. We wanted to do a lot of union busting and things like that. But in one sense, and many would tell you the same thing, they pushed really far, right? Some of these labor unions did push pretty far. But now we're coming back into this center where we can reach accommodation. This isn't the first time. I mean, there's labor unions supported Richard Nixon.
Right.
So this is
a big part of Richard Nixon's platform.
Yeah. This is not a, revolutionary concept necessarily. We're kind of coming back around to it. Hard hats for Nixon, right? Mm-hmm. So, yes, I mean, it's, we conflated public sector unions and private sector unions is the same thing. And they're not. They're not. You're starting to see a divergence in those two. My locals, they a lot of times, because of the antagonism that we've seen and confrontation with public sector unions in the state of West Virginia, they don't want to get lumped in with that. That's, teachers unions is not the, United Steelworkers. That these are two different things. And what I would mention on this is an important point. I mean, people who have a right to association collectively bargaining for wages is literally a free market principle. This is not anti-free market. People, it's a push and a pull, right? In a free market capitalist system, for people, if they want to, collectively bargain for their wages and also their benefits. So I don't see anything outside of that. But obviously, the public sector unions are in many places off the rails, and the teachers unions where, I've had some unfortunate interactions with them as I run an educational savings account in West Virginia. I'm a big believer in educational freedom and school choice. That's something I've worked very hard on. And so, teachers unions don't like me, and they'll support whoever's running against me, which is fine. But, at the same time, as much as the teachers unions hate me, the labor unions like me. Mm-hmm. So I'm just one person, but that would be one example of that kind of divergence that we're starting to see in separation between those two.
Mm-hmm. And you entered the office of Treasurer of West Virginia with that background, those experiences, in a political moment where the right was gaining ground with the working class and now needed to deliver some sort of policy result to start to cement those gains and get others to come on board. And as I mentioned previously, you came up with this Jumpstart program, mm-hmm. as well as divesting all of West Virginia's funds from BlackRock. Tell us a little bit about those two policies and why labor unions and working class families were so supportive of those moves.
Well, I'll start with BlackRock. And as I mentioned, obviously, we've naturally always had a lot of corporate skepticism in the state of West Virginia. BlackRock and a lot of these other asset managers and massive financial institutions, banks, had put in a prohibition and basically boycotted investing or lending money to the fossil fuel industry. First and foremost, coal, right? Also natural gas pipelines and some of these other things. And so BlackRock was managing our state tax dollars. They were part of that. And it was like, why in the world are we subsidizing our own destruction? There is a clear conflict of interest. And meanwhile, they're down there in a confrontational negotiation with the United Mine Workers. That's a coal mining union down in Alabama, and there was a lot of things going on there. And Republican, Democrat, whoever it is in West Virginia, when you're attacking coal, you're attacking us, our way of life, and a lot of our guys are unionized. And if we're not mining coal, they're not working. The average coal miner, by the way, in West Virginia, union coal miners making $90,000 a year. These are good jobs where your average home price might be $150,000, right? Like where they live in. So
your dollar goes a long way.
It goes a long way.
The amount of time they can work is a little bit shorter, so they get the benefits, try to save as much as they can for retirement, et cetera, right? Yeah. They're dangerous jobs.
They're dangerous jobs. So we divested our tax dollars. I divested our tax dollars out of BlackRock, and then also created, which I was the first elected official in the country to do that. And then we created the restricted financial institution list. I went to the legislature and passed a law and said, if you are boycotting the fossil fuel industry, you will lose your ability to bid on any financial service contract with the state of West Virginia. And we created a list. You can go to my website and look it up, see who's on that list. I'm not going to name them all out here for you. Obviously, BlackRock's on there, JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Citi,
And what's the scheme that they use you said, you're giving your tax dollars to a corporation that wants to destroy your state's way of life, essentially.
Yeah. So there's a conflict of interest. So if I'm handing over tax dollars generated from the coal industry, like severance taxes, and giving it to, say, JP Morgan Chase to manage those tax dollars, while in their statement of policy, their stated goal is to divest from all coal mining activities, they're trying to destroy the very dollars in which they're managing. There's a conflict of interest there. So that's where we ended up putting a bunch of these financial institutions on that list. And I'm proud to say that we've had, I think it's 12 states follow our lead, joined our coalition to divest from BlackRock. We've had another 8 states pass legislation just like we did with the restricted financial institution list throughout the country. And you've seen these large financial institutions start to hedge. And so, the working class in West Virginia said, hell yeah, finally somebody's standing up to these guys. Somebody is doing something. And if you flash back to what we were talking about earlier, kind of the libertarian mindset, it's like, well, don't use government, let's kind of let the free market work it out. It's like, you think this is free market? You're crazy. This ESG scheme that they had out here that was destroying us was, which still persists today. ESG is still there, but we had to fight back against it. We had to push back against it. We had coal operators coming to me saying, I'm losing access to capital. We can't finance our stuff. No bank with us. We're getting debanked all over the place. And so we pushed back against it and got other states, great state treasurers, patriotic people that helped stand up against this ESG movement that was destroying West Virginia. But yeah, the working class of West Virginia was like, yes, thank you for doing this, fighting for our jobs, fighting for our economy, fighting for our way of life. And so that really, I think, helped solidify support in that regard. And, in terms of the libertarian mindset, it'd be, no, don't exercise authority and power through your elected office. That's literally, though, why people elected me. They did not elect me to get on television and tell them that they're getting screwed. They already know that. They know that. They elected me to do something about it. And that's what I did. And then on the Jumpstart program, it's a really novel concept, only exists in West Virginia. Knock on wood here, we can do something about it in Congress. I'd love to see it. It's a savings program. Think of like a 529. Now, not for school. It's not for school. But if you've ever come out of a trade school or something like that and you get going in your career, you will notice that it is very expensive to start your career. So this savings account, it allows people to save for tools, equipment, licenses, certifications, and new business startup costs. And you had the unions, trade unions came in and endorsed it, and the Chamber of Commerce endorsed it, which, it's not common to get both of those guys agreeing with something. They both endorsed the program, Manufacturers Association, everybody loved it. It's a program where we have now a few hundred participants in the state of West Virginia in it. We're continuing to grow. We're continuing to modernize that. I'm actually going down to Charleston next week, where we're going to have another one of my last board meetings that I'm going to chair as I chair that board. And essentially, you can put, as you put money into the account, you can write it off your income taxes up to $25,000. And then as you draw down on the account, you can write that off your income taxes up to $25,000, federally adjusted gross income. So if you made $50,000 in a year, say you put $25,000 in, that's a lot. But if you put $25,000 in, then you could adjust that down to $25,000 in terms of your tax liability for that year to the state. So then there's investment options that we're rolling in, just like a 529. Now, the problem, we were able to get rid of the taxes that you have to pay on capital gains in West Virginia, but the federal capital gains tax still exists. So this is why I really want to make this a federal program mirroring the 529, where we can authorize it federally, but each state has to buy into it on their own. We're not going to mandate it down to the states, but let each state buy into it own, just like the 529. Mm-hmm. So it opens it up for everybody. And, it's been, I think, very successful. It's tough starting any new government program, but that was another way that we were able to come together with the trade unions, even the right to work guys too, Chamber of Commerce, whoever. This is about jobs. We're trying to get people to work. We're trying to get people into the trades.
You've balanced the working class desire to have job security and to reduce barriers to entry for the labor market, plus the Chamber of Commerce's desire to start new businesses.
Yes.
Right? At the same time.
Yes.
Yeah. And so the people of West Virginia decide that they want to send you to Washington. You get elected, and I don't think people understand how crazy it is for someone who has a title blank elect. Tell us about these last few weeks as you prepare to enter the next Congress. I mean, what is orientation like for a member of Congress?
Yeah, they did a good job. So the House Administration Committee does the orientation process, roughly 2 weeks, give or take. We just went through it, and they did a very good job. Kind of went over everything in terms of, setting up your office, and here's all the do's and don'ts and all this other stuff. So some of this is like repeat for me, right? Because I did work on the Hill. But I thought they did a very good job. Chairman Brian Stile, great job. Hats off to him. And because I know my colleagues, they really enjoyed it. I'd say probably the highlight for me is we had our freshman class elections. So those are class president, steering, policy, and then there's a leadership slot. So somebody gets into House leadership, which is the elected leadership committee, which, Speaker, Majority Leader, and all those folks. And my colleagues elected me into the leadership slot. So I am on the ELK, as they call it, the elected leadership committee, which was, really honored to be able to represent them in leadership, my freshman class. So very exciting.
What are their desires for this? We're gearing up for a spending fight that you guys won't take part in, but come 2025, you guys are going to be involved in whatever spending fight comes next, whether that's in September or whether that's in March, right? We've heard that deadline floated around for some sort of continuing resolution that could be passed in December. What are your guys' priorities going into this next Congress? I mean, I think everyone is coming in with the expectation that the delta is really small in the House. We got a lot of work to do, and we're going to have really 2 years to govern before we could have a election where we lose the House or we lose the Senate. Could go either way, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it's really less than 2 years, right? Because then you're in an election cycle in 26 and everything. I mean, these first 100 days are going to be critical, and you're going to see a lot of pieces moving through reconciliation process. That's what we're going to be doing out of the gate. Right? What can we do through reconciliation? Well, I mean, there's several things you can do there. Immigration, tariffs, taxes, right? But first and foremost, you got to pass a budget, right? Because you're going to have those instructions within that budget for reconciliation. And then the committees are going to go to work. And we're going to have marathon markups and everything else. Now, it's got to go over to the Senate, get the bird bath, right? Our former U.S. Senator, Robert Byrd. So we're going to go through that process and see what makes it. But, they're meeting this week in the Senate talking reconciliation. So that is going to be top of the agenda. And our agenda is President Trump's agenda. That is what we're doing, right? What his agenda is very clear. And it's those things I just mentioned, right? And all of which we can do through reconciliation. So that is going to be the first 100 days. That is what we're going to be working on right out of the gate. And
has there been anything that's surprised you so far about the orientation process? Something that you didn't know before?
Well, I'd say the one difference, and I just wasn't aware of it. Apparently, staff can sue you now. Before they weren't able to. At least when I was there, I never heard anybody suing a member of Congress.
No one offered you to come on a class action lawsuit against your former boss?
No. Those didn't exist. So that's interesting, but not foreign to me because I can be sued at the state level. So yeah, kind of got it.
Do you think that the House has the political will to enact the president's agenda in a blitz-like fashion?
I do.
Yeah,
I do. As I've sat in those conference meetings, and just speaking for my freshman class, people don't want to monkey around. They don't want to horse around on any of this stuff. They just want to go. President Trump's got the mandate, and President Trump's got the vision, and that's what we're going to work on, are those items that are so important to him and the American people and our constituents.
As you look forward to this first 100 days of the next administration, obviously you're going to have those big ticket items. But for you, are there pieces of legislation that you've been drawing up in your mind that you're enthusiastic to introduce, or is there going to be some waiting and seeing, getting your footing, is that what it's like for a new congressman? Do you have to get your footing before you start going to the cloakroom, or do you come in with a day one agenda of your own?
Well, I'm going to have a day one agenda. and I keep mentioning, right? I work there, so I kind of, it was literally my job to write legislation on a committee. So, we're going to have day one agenda, but, a lot of it really dovetails with things that I ran on. I've been talking about elimination of the Department of Education, for example, right? That's going to be on the table. That is top of the order for me, and I think many other people. Tariffs, reciprocal tariffs in particular, that's something that I want to see happen. That's going to be important to me. Tax extenders and all these other things I've mentioned. Energy, that's another one that we can do through reconciliation. That's huge for us in West Virginia. We've got to do something about that. I mean, it's crazy. We got an ocean of natural gas, 1,000 years at least of natural gas, and we can't get it out because we can't build pipeline because of overregulation and things like that. I mean, we're trying to get this stuff to terminal, and we can't do it. So there's a lot of those kind of things. Now, what I'd like to see done, and this has been mentioned, I'm sure, by others, but I want the most favored nation status of China repealed. I want that gone. We used to authorize that every year. We should go back to that. Why should they have just some automatic waiver to do this when there's obviously manipulative things that are happening on their side as it relates to trade? There's no fair trade with them at all, right? I mean, go take a look at the trade deficit. I mean, it's very clear what's going on there. And it's hurt us in West Virginia. That's why tariffs are important to me. We had to close down a tin plate steel manufacturing facility because we couldn't get tariff relief from the Biden administration. China was dumping cheap tin plate steel into the marketplace. We, United Steelworkers and Cleveland Cliffs, went to go get tariff relief, and which is in law, right? Anti-dumping, and did not receive that. And then subsequent to that, the ITC, International Trade Commission, voted 3-0, no tariffs. So what happened? We laid off 1,000 United Steelworkers, and that tin plate steel manufacturing facility idled. Now, the scary thing to think about is that there's only 2 blast furnaces in the entire country that makes tin plate steel. Only 2. Now there's 1. There's 1 left in Ohio. Does that sound like a place we want to? I mean, does this sound like,
does this sound like prepared to you?
Yeah. Does this sound like a good idea? Now, luckily, the state of West Virginia, which I was one of the people that led this delegation up to Cleveland, we put $50 million in to recapitalize that facility, and we're going to be making now electrical steel to make transformers. And we're going to be able to hire those people back because the state came in. But the government's not protecting their own industries and their own people. And why? Because, you had the food industry over there saying, this is going to raise the price of a tin can by 50 cents, which is ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous. And guess what? Since they closed down that tin plate steel manufacturing facility, China upped the price on tin plate steel. Imagine that. When you got the corner on the market.
Right.
And so, I mean, obviously this was just, they manipulate things constantly. The idea was to weaken our industrial base, weaken us as a country, and look, we don't have an industrial base that can compete with China's right now at all. It's a huge problem. So that's why I mentioned these things in terms of most favored nation status, tariffs, things of that nature. Things that we need to focus on, not only for economic security, but for national security. Yeah.
A lot to get done. And you wouldn't be a congressman-elect if you and your freshman colleagues weren't already concerned about reelection. 2026, midterms, especially with the new coalition on the right, are going to be difficult. For you freshman members in particular, you come from a safer spot, but a lot of these folks joining you in Washington, D.C., they could be in purplish districts where if they don't deliver, they're going to have to answer to their constituents in the ballot box. As we head into this next term and when we get to 2026, what do you and your freshman colleagues say? This needs to be done for us to approach our voters and say, you need to vote, you ought to vote for me in this election. What does success look like for you guys before the 2026 midterm election?
Well, it's really going to be determined in this first 100 days, I think. how much can we get done through reconciliation? Because those are all literally like the top items for this administration and for people that were elected. I mean, immigration, energy, right? I mean, like these are, cost of living, all these things that we can do through reconciliation, I think is really going to set the tone. And I've seen it. Congresses get deflated when we're not able to meet those marks out of the gate, the first 100 days of administration, but we have to execute. We have to execute. Now, obviously, my reelection, if you're talking about a Democrat who's running against me, I mean, I just won by 42 points in my district. I got roughly 72% of the vote. I'm not as worried. But what I'm going to be doing is helping all of my colleagues, as I had in this last election cycle. I'm certainly a little more far right than some of my colleagues, but if they're not there, we don't govern. Right. So I'm going to do everything I can to try to help bring these folks back, which includes raising money and all those other things, which I did in this last cycle. Raise money for NRCC. I raised money for members of Congress all over the country. There's not a frontline member that I probably didn't donate to.
Well, that is some orientation to Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Welcome to Washington, D.C. And thank you, Representative-elect Riley Moore, for joining the Signal Sitdown.
No, thanks for having me. Appreciate the conversation.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sitdown. Before you go, be sure to hit like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may be joining us. And please remember to give us a 5-star review. We not only love your feedback, but it really does help the show. Remember, it's your government, and together we'll expose how it really works. See you next time.